Hello, my name is host Eric. I'm talking to famous people, and I want to talk in this episode about extending probable cause standards to schools to protect students from unwarranted searches and seizures. So, in the status quo, students are afforded less constitutional protection against search and seizure on school grounds than elsewhere. And the current public forum debate resolution is that, in fact, students should be protected by probable cause on school just like they are out in the world. So, my take on this is, to be honest, I'm somewhat conflicted about it. I don't necessarily feel it's necessary to affirm that students have rights against search and seizure on school grounds as a basic principle, but I also know that in the status quo it mostly gets abused, and the people who get arrested at school and stuff because they have some weed on them or something, or they have a pocket knife and some zero tolerance policy or something like that, makes it almost impossible to have searches produce net good in the status quo. So I'm somewhat conflicted on how to go about dealing with this topic as a public forum topic, what kind of cases to run. I've got a few different cases in mind, but I would love to hear anybody else's thoughts on searching kids at school. Does anybody have an opinion about whether or not kids should be subject to random, unwarranted searches at school? I'm talking about people under 18.
I mean, I have no reason to think that they should be searched.
Well, in the status quo, the standard is something along the lines of reasonable suspicion. Or, for lockers, they don't even need that. It's school property and they can be searched at any time. Well, yeah,
Yeah,
people
but the
get
stuff in
searched.
the locker is the
What's that?
locker. The stuff. Sorry, the stuff in the locker is just as much theirs as it is the schools. Well, I mean, not even that. It's more of theirs than it is the schools.
Right, but I mean, the point of it is some things that they might have in their locker are considered contraband at school. Things like a gun, for example. Now, if they search a kid's locker and in fact they find an Uzi in there, a loaded Uzi, and a note, a list of people they're going to kill, then one would argue after the fact, like, well, that was a good idea that they searched that kid's locker. But Adorable Cloud says in order to get a locker at my school, you had to agree to random searches. In most places, that is the case with the lockers. So that's why I'm trying not to talk so much about what happens with locker searches as what happens with backpack and person searches. You would get in trouble for doing what? Searching somebody's locker? Does Olivia? Okay, so Olivia said that in British schools, students' lockers are not subject to search. Are there circumstances in which they could become subject to search? Where they have to get a warrant, or I don't know what the legal processes are in England. Interesting. Well, typically in the United States, when students are searched, it's because, well, here's an example case. So, a teacher saw a student smoking outside of school and claimed to smell marijuana, which then they brought the student to the principal's office. The principal ended up searching the student and searching the student's bags, and eventually, after some considerable searching, found some marijuana in the locker, and that was ruled a legitimate search. So, I mean, the thing about it is, I think the problem is the drug laws, right? More than anything else, than the search protocols. They search the bags first, then they search the locker. But see, the thing is, of course, the smell from the marijuana couldn't have come from the pipe in the locker, So the teacher must have been wrong about smelling the marijuana. Brenda didn't have marijuana on them. They were smoking a cigarette. But it's assumed that the teacher was smelling correctly because they eventually did find marijuana in the student's locker. Well, that's bullshit, right? First of all, who cares if they're smoking weed? You know? That's the number one problem. Who cares if they're smoking weed? If their parents care a lot, then
yeah. I mean, it's not a good thing.
No, it's not necessarily a good thing. I don't advocate in favor of smoking weed all the time. It's an expensive habit and everything, you know.
Shift the focus from, since you were talking about the primary problem being with the drug laws and whatnot, shift the focus from smoking to what if it was suspected that they had a weapon?
Okay, so the weapon thing makes it a complicated issue, right? But see, this is the thing. If you were only searching people's lockers and bags and stuff for guns, then, well, because that's where they had the probable cause of search, right? Because supposedly the smell was marijuana, adorable cloud, and so their marijuana must have been in the bag or something. But they didn't find it in there.
Who cares if they have a gun? So what?
Well, do we want to have... At what age is it okay for them to bring a gun to school?
I don't think there should be one. I mean, whatever.
So then if the issue's not with, bringing a gun, then perhaps the issue, just trying to think, in situations where, because I guess the point is there's a concern that somebody's going to start a school shooting I'm thinking maybe the problem lies in that people need to be paying more attention to the attitudes of the kids. More so.
Yeah, and more people should have guns so they can shoot that guy when he starts shooting up the place.
I mean, ultimately, I'm not sure that the guns... I mean, I could see why there'd be legitimate reasons why you wouldn't want a gun in a school that's not,
The only people that are going to follow "don't bring your gun to school" are the law-abiding citizens that actually care. The people that want to shoot up the school are going to bring a gun to school regardless.
Okay, but no, smart. The point is, if we know that it is not okay, if we have a rule, let's say, that while we respect Second Amendment rights wholly, we've decided that it's reasonable to place limitations on the Second Amendment rights when it comes to underage students on the grounds that cognitively they haven't developed all the necessary decision-making qualities that make a fully consenting citizen. And we know that children are prone to making some unwise decisions sometimes. So we're going to eliminate the possibility of having guns on campus. Now, if somebody does bring a gun on campus, puts it in their locker and plans to shoot up the school a couple hours from now, then somebody else reports it, which does happen periodically. Like the kid shows the gun off to some other kid at school who says, "Don't tell anybody." And then the kid goes and tells. And then you have an issue of, well, do we get to search the locker for this gun or not? Now, to me, it matters a lot whether that's what you're searching for or whether you're searching for something else, because a gun in school, I mean...
How's that different than a kid bringing a gun to a supermarket?
The issue isn't really so much the gun. I mean...
Well, that's what Eric's saying. He's saying that the gun is the thing that they should be searching for, not drugs.
Well, I mean, I think I would be okay with having laws that preclude children from having guns.
Well, and then you're also saying that they should be able to search because of that at school.
Right, but see, I'm making a distinction that says we don't let children drive cars, and I'm not. I have more problem with that than saying we shouldn't let children have guns. Because we're asking them to make fully adult moral decisions. Like, you might have to make a decision where you need to shoot somebody to stop a violence in progress or something like that. I don't think it's fair to burden kids with that moral agency, and I don't think they're capable of handling it.
I think they'd be more capable of handling it if we didn't have laws like that.
Like what?
And if they actually respected their family. Like, if the family unit mattered, then I don't think we'd have many of the problems we have now.
America was great again.
I still don't understand why we need to have kids have guns at school.
Because there's going to be kids that are going to shoot up the place if they want to do that.
Would you feel better if they're...
Who cares if you're going to have a law that says don't bring a gun to school? What's that going to do? Make you feel good inside? Give you a fuzzy feeling? Like, what's it going to do?
It'll justify expelling a student who might potentially be violent and want to shoot up school.
You can justify that in other ways. You're being violent and you have a firearm, and you shouldn't be acting like that when you have a firearm.
Well, I know you shouldn't, but
there's other ways of justifying.
Okay, look, I don't generally find myself arguing this side of things, not with Mark. I find myself here struggling a bit because I'm arguing a compromise position of sorts that says, even though I'm in favor of gun rights for adults, I think a reasonable compromise limits the gun rights of kids. And I recognize the fact that, I mean, I don't think we don't need to have anybody be armed at school. Why are we assuming that somebody else is, why do you assume that this guard is less likely to shoot at the school than anybody else?
It's his duty.
Yeah, I'm not.
No, I'm not saying, I'm talking stainless bears. Stainless bears ask, I don't think the answer is to allow minors to be armed at school. Maybe have armed guards or teachers. But I don't buy the armed guards or teachers thing because, you know, I don't assume they're less likely to. Yeah, it's time to go to back to school Glock shopping. I mean,
I think the problem, I think the issue is the problem's so interconnected to other problems that it's not simply a matter. I think you mentioned taking a compromise stance, but I think that's kind of the stance you take when so many other things are already being compromised. If kids are allowed to get to the point where they're finding themselves in the position where they're willing to shoot up a school, it's because other things have been going wrong outside of them.
Right, I'm not disputing that, but does it mean that we can't reasonably have a rule that says, school rule here, you can't bring your guns on campus?
No,
we can have armed guards search people.
Well, look, we can have the rule without using the rule to justify searches also. Remember, the issue of searches is a more tricky one. So it's possible to defend the school ought to be able to have that rule and say, if you want to attend my school, you have to agree to leave your guns at home. The problem is, of course, we have public schools. So they have to afford equal protection under the law to everybody because they're public. A private school, I think we can all agree, should have the right to make that a school rule and to make it an expellable offense to bring a gun into the school. Right? Can we disagree with that one?
Yeah, I mean, constitutionally, the government has no right to be involved in school.
Right, I agree with you. Public schools shouldn't exist. I agree.
I'm not saying I would, like, if I was running my own country, it might be different. But I'm saying if you're gonna go by the laws of this country, it doesn't matter what I think or what I want. Public schools shouldn't be happening.
Although one could argue, not host Mark, that because most of the funding from the public schools comes from state governments and local governments, that the part of the Constitution that's been incorporated out to apply to the states and local governments isn't applicable here, and that it is within the states' constitutionally afforded powers to run public schools. One can make that argument, at least. It's not entirely cut and dry.
At the same time, yeah, but then at the same time, the original Constitution was only between you and the federal government. It had nothing to do with the state. And then, after the Civil War, there were amendments passed that forced states to accept the Constitution as their Constitution and the Bill of Rights to be included in their Constitution, which is completely absurd. Completely absurd.
There's also something going on with the Department of Defense. Like, I live in South Korea on a military base here, and the school here is directly run by the federal government, which is quite interesting.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and those amendments were passed without the consent of the states. They were under Reconstruction. They were being militarily controlled by the North. That's ridiculous.
Okay, but look, you have to decide whether you're going to make arguments within the legal framework or not within the legal framework. And you can't bounce back and forth in and out of it, right? So
I'm not bouncing in and out of it. I'm saying if we're going to go to legal framework, which is what I'm going to do, we shouldn't have them.
Well, I agree. Now, given the fact that we do have them in the status quo anyway, is it within the purview of those unconstitutional bodies to pass rules regarding gun possession on campus?
Well, if they're unconstitutional at their base, they're unconstitutional at their branches too.
Okay, fair enough. It kind of defies any sort of practical solution to hammer that point down, though.
Question is, are you going to utilize some patchwork and just make a decision and say they can or cannot be allowed in until you can deal with the bigger problems? If you find yourself in the situation where you're able to, ban guns from school, or not necessarily guns, but make a decision whether or not you're going to do searches. I mean, you're talking about there being bigger problems, or, there being issues at a constitutional level. It depends on, I think, how much authority and power you have to change those things.
Right. I mean, the question becomes then, well, what's better in the status quo? Is the status quo to apply the probable cause standard to students in those schools or not? We don't have an option of dismantling the status quo entirely and replacing it with some better status quo, so what are we going to choose to do, given this option to change the status quo in way X? Yes or no? That's the resolution. So, I don't know, not host Mark, how do you respond to the resolution? Do you negate it necessarily because it doesn't have the answer you prefer?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to negate it because it's unconstitutional. I mean, if no one's going to argue that it's unconstitutional, that's when our rights start going away. If no one's going to stand up and say that that's wrong, I'm not going to apply myself to that, and I'm not going to agree to that, then we're just going to slowly become slaves to King Obama or whatever.
Okay, but what about this line of argumentation that says within the existing unconstitutional status quo, we can make the unfortunately unconstitutional status quo slightly more constitutional by applying the probable cause standard to students in schools, at least more so than they'll have more rights protections than they currently have. So why ought we not do that? If in fact rights protections... Go ahead.
You're letting the other side, the evil side, set up the stage and say, hey, come debate me on this one. Why would I go up on that stage and debate him on his stage? I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to win on his terms. That's not the game I'm going to play.
Okay.
It seems a bit unreasonable to me, because if you don't have the power to do anything...
That's as unreasonable as he is.
Well, what if the students say, hey, mister, listen, I agree with you, but I really would like the additional rights protections afforded by this course of action. And therefore, I'm advocating in favor of this unfortunate compromise solution because it's an improvement over the status quo. Won't you prioritize my actual rights protections over your absolutism regarding a preferable counterplan? Because what you're really saying is there exists a preferable counterplan we should do instead that's exclusive of this one.
asking to be castrated. That's what they're asking for. Like, if you look at Karl Marx, he's like, if they're just going to end at socialism because the workers are happy enough to the point where they're not going to rise and get the sense of class consciousness that they need to turn it over to true communism. That's exactly what this is doing. We're going to become so pacified, and we're going to be okay with where we're at when it's really not okay.
Well, but what if the revolution is incremental? I mean, we've seen substantial improvements in certain areas in public policy over time. We've seen the capacity of individuals, a change in consciousness regarding what's acceptable, to cause changes in policy, ranging from marijuana to gay marriage to police violence. So why then can't we assume that, in fact, improvement towards a fair and just society, which promotes individual autonomy and individual liberty, can't be an incremental one?
It's been going downhill the whole time. Well, why would it go back the other way? I don't think we've been making. You might step up one step, but you're going to go fall back 10. Like, that's what we've been doing.
Okay, but here's the thing. What are those? Hold on. What are those 10 steps? Because you just said that, but you also have to give examples.
Like, what has been going? I mean, I'm a Christian, so I would say that anything that goes against Christian morality in our government has been bad, and so we've been moving further away from that. Christianity's vilified now.
Not host Mark.
That's not the government, dude.
One of my explanations. I was going to go into my explanations, but you asked for it. So
let him talk. Yeah, let him talk it out. Go ahead, not host Mark. We apologize for interrupting. Anyway. Go ahead.
That's it. That's what I'm going to say.
Okay. I would argue, not host Mark, that even if that's your criterion, that you haven't actually done an impact calculus on the various policies probably and evaluated each according to that criterion, comparing it against past policies according to that criterion to determine whether or not things are going downhill or not. I would posit that's the case.
I'm not following. I didn't follow that.
Saying if you're going to claim that things are going downhill,
right,
even if you're using that criterion, to successfully claim according to that criterion that things are going downhill, you'd have to evaluate a whole set of current policies, each of them getting its own metric according to that criterion that you've set up, okay? And then compare equivalent policies from the past according to the same criterion to see if, in fact, the past policies aligned better according to you than the current policies do. Additionally, you need to take a wide spread of policies, not just cherry-pick ones that align with a preconceived result on this.
There is not constitutional separation of church and state. That's not even in the Constitution. That's a complete lie. It's not
okay, but we're talking about directionality now, not any specific thing.
Well,
right?
that was in the chat. There's no such thing as separation of church and state. It's not a thing.
Okay. Now, look, regardless of that, my point is directionality. You're saying things are going downhill. I actually believe things are going in the right direction, in general. Now, we are in the middle of something of an ideological battle to make people understand, to make them see the state using power against the individual, make them bear witness to it, so they know how awful it is. There's a struggle to get that to happen. There's no doubt about that. But I think
if you're gonna appease them, like, they're not gonna have the urge to fight anymore. Like, if you're gonna compromise with the bad side, they're not gonna want to fight. They're not gonna want to fight with what you want to fight for. They're not gonna win. The people aren't gonna win. They're gonna win.
Well, what you were offering here is what's called a critique. A KRITIK, or critic, is sometimes called in debate, okay? A K. And you're saying the only moral choice here, the only good choice, is to neither affirm nor negate this resolution, or not to affirm it, but to negate it necessarily on the grounds that it validates an existing status quo that's unacceptable. That to validate that status quo through compromise is to fail in one's duty as a moral agent to behave in accordance with the right, Okay?
Right,
So,
and with the law of the land, with the original meaning of the Constitution, like it's going against all of that. Like what they're doing is going against all of that. Why should I be okay with that?
okay, well, for one thing,
Or resolution.
I can quote you a lot of original meaning stuff if you want to talk about what the Constitution means in addition to what it says. Then the best source for originalist arguments is the Federalist Papers. And I can show you in no uncertain terms where it talks about how the Supreme Court ought to have primacy in interpreting the laws, and how the laws of the land ought to adhere to the interpretations of the Supreme Court. So, given that that mechanism is in place, it's really hard to argue that we should abandon all contemporary interpretive constitutionalist arguments in favor of an originalist argument. Instead, I think a more nuanced approach that says we need to excise away those interpretations that are in direct contradiction with clear meaning of clearly worded sections of the Constitution, that we isolate. Okay, we want to go big picture and say we have to scrap everything and go back to this originalist interpretation of things. Well, we know that's impossible. There's no way through the existing legal mechanisms.
Well, Eric,
If you're implying that we should engage in some sort of revolution, then I don't know how that would be accomplished. Certainly not through muskets. So the point I'm trying to make is this: it makes sense to both lament the primacy of the status quo and to utilize the mechanisms of the status quo to improve it. It's not conceding the framework like you say it is. You can make your arguments in the framework that you think you ought to make it in. You can say, I am arguing in favor of this as an inadequate solution to a wretched problem. And then you can spend the whole time describing how awful the status quo is if you want, but you can still end that argument saying, and that's why I affirm this, is because it's a slight improvement, totally inadequate. And hopefully, as they engage in this reality of having to actually demonstrate probable cause, we'll have more opportunity to make more of these arguments and shame you more for your failures. That's fine. Choosing to withdraw entirely from the discussion by saying it's all my way or nothing, I don't think is useful.
you said in another video multiple times that we should do what we ought to do, because anything other than what we ought to do is not the good thing to do.
And I've also said in many occasions that if I were compelled to engage in a world of practical public policy, I would make pragmatic compromises so long as they had a net benefit in terms of rights violations.
Yeah, but if over the long term, it's not going to have a net benefit. It's going to be.
Well, that's your claim, but it's unwarranted. It's your claim, but it's unwarranted. You've yet to justify how that would be the case. What's the mechanism by which taking incremental benefits precludes further benefits down the line? You haven't explained that.
Because I can keep my rights without making an agreement. I can just say no.
We're not making any sort of agreement by saying schools should have to adhere to a stricter standard of justification before searching students than they currently do. Is not making any sort of agreement that says, yeah, we agree that it's good that they search them on the stricter standard. We can totally argue the alternative, that no, we shouldn't have to adhere to any standard or whatever you want to argue. But we can still make the point that this is preferable to the status quo and therefore we should do it. It doesn't preclude us from making those other arguments down the line.
But why should it be this government issue? It shouldn't be a government issue at all because they're not warranted for it to be a government issue.
I agree, but that's not the thing being debated right now, right? We're not debating whether or not we should get rid of all the public schools. If we were debating that, I would agree with you 100% that yes, we should get rid of them all. And for multiple reasons beyond just the constitutional ones. For multiple reasons, not just constitutional ones. But it is possible to narrow the framing and say, given that we have these things in the status quo, and given that we have policies related to these things, and given that we have arguments to be made regarding the policies related to these things in the status quo, and given that we can't have that argument yet, or aren't having that argument yet, about whether or not we should destroy them, there's no meaningful way that you're going to get other participants to go from zero to let's get rid of all the public schools without any incremental change at all. So given all these realities, why should we not then engage in the incremental change aspect of things?
Because I'm not going to debate on their floor because they're unjustified in what they're talking about. They have no right to be talking about that.
You
They have
don't
no right
have
to be
to.
talking about
Then make those arguments to them. You don't concede their floor. You don't concede their
It's like
floor.
someone coming up to me and saying, you can't eat cupcakes. Like, what? Why? You have no right to tell me that. You don't have authority over me. It's the same thing. Why should I listen to that guy that I shouldn't eat cupcakes?
Okay, well, not host Mark, we agree that if it were a private school, it would be acceptable for the private school to make these sort of rules as a condition of joining this private school, right?
Yeah.
So if I have a community, a small community, let's say unincorporated, and they have their own local school district, and all the members of this small community chip in for a one-room schoolhouse, hire a school teacher from back east, like olden days, and employ that individual to teach their kids, is it okay for that small community to dictate to the teacher that it's okay for that teacher to search their kids?
No, it's not okay for that to happen. Why should it be up to the
What if all the parents agree? I mean, how much control do the parents have over their kids?
Is it a community thing? Is it the parents doing it? If it's parents doing it, that's fine.
Yeah, it is a community thing. It's the parents all agreeing that this policy should be in
place. Go over there and
place.
search the kids' stuff. Why not? Go over there. Go in your kid's locker.
Okay, so fine. If the point is, though, not host Mark, that school districts often are surprisingly local matters. They have a local school board that makes decisions based on community input in often small cities. The Temple City School District here is not an awful entity in existence, and it is responsive to the community to some extent. It's not perfect. It's bad. I agree. We should get rid of it. Private enterprise does a better job of educating than public schools do. But that doesn't mean that they're entirely non-representative of the community's wishes. For the most part, the rules of the school are dictated by hearings and stuff like that in a fairly active community around here. It's a fairly well-to-do community. The parents are getting what they want for their kids. Now, I am not saying that invalidates your constitutionality arguments or anything like that. I'm saying in the real world, community members are getting things that they view as useful for their kids in a school system that's not perfect, but that they pay property taxes for because they own a home in that community. That's how most local school districts work. So in that reality, given that you're not going to go into every community and say, we destroy your community school district, given that you're not going to do that, it would be a good idea to extend probable cause to students on schools as a legal precedent. It's not an unreasonable question to ask.
If we're going to do that, let's just give them everything. Like, why not? Let's give them everything.
So if we can't take, but see, you're saying give them things, right? You're basically saying this. Hey, not host Mark, you're saying this. If we can't take back everything, we won't take back anything. Why?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so
because
why would you let them keep? Why would you let them keep what they shouldn't have? Why do you want to let them keep what they shouldn't have?
Everybody will see the evils that they will commit, and they will commit so many evils and atrocities that we'll have to do something.
Well,
Give them everything.
It would seem to me that not host Mark, you'd acknowledge that if they shouldn't have something, then we should take it back, right?
Yeah, they shouldn't have anything. They shouldn't have anything that they want.
Okay.
Because
if they shouldn't have, hey, not host Mark, if they shouldn't have anything, then is there any single thing that they should have?
If it's justified, I'm talking about the unjustified things themselves.
Okay, fine. So they shouldn't have anything unjustified, right?
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Absolutely.
So is there any single thing that they should have that's unjustified?
There is not any single thing that they should have that is unjustified.
Okay, great. So why are you advocating against us taking back something that they have that is unjustified?
Because we should have more.
But taking back one thing doesn't preclude us from taking back other things.
It's accepting defeat.
No. It's taking something back they shouldn't have, remember?
It's like China taking over the United States and then us being like, yeah, we'll just have Wisconsin.
It's not conceding anything. Now, notice, Mark, to take back one thing is not to concede that we ought not take back anything else. It's not to concede that we ought to be satisfied by taking back that one thing. It's to make progress.
I mean, I guess I'm just more stubborn than you. Is what it comes down to. I want it all.
Hey, Eric.
Yeah.
I was just gonna add a idea for a compromise, but incremental. Not really solution, but just something to move towards. Is if in a school you have to pass, or you find yourself passing something that made searches possible, you could incorporate it. Like as a teacher, you could incorporate it into what you're teaching the kids, and if you tell them, hey, if you don't like being searched or whatnot, you can inform them why people in power believe that the searches are necessary, and you can use it as a teaching opportunity.
Well, in the status quo, they have to have reasonable suspicion, right? Which isn't a very high standard. I'm pretty sure I should search you. Well, why? Yeah, you're kind of shady looking. It's like that's a reasonable suspicion. So, I missed the very beginning of what you were saying there, though, Ken. Could you repeat the beginning part of that?
Sorry, I'm just trying to think. Like, if you find yourself in a school, I'm talking like low level. If you're in a school, I was saying use searches if they are happening as a teacher. Something you could do would be to talk to your students about it and inform them why it's going on.
Well, I mean, I certainly would use it as an opportunity to teach about consent and search and government power and all those sort of things.
That's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to make anything big out of it. I was just offering something.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. If I were a teacher at a school that was doing that sort of thing, I had my class today and talked about this stuff, in Walnut with the debaters. Getting them to understand how probable cause is interpreted now, how it's interpreted for vehicles, stuff like that. And, no, they say you need to stay down. No, sweetie. No. Yeah. It's interesting because they don't really have any awareness of what the current policies are. It doesn't really matter to them. They're not likely to get searched. They're Chinese kids in a rich area. It's not going to happen. They're just not going to end up really getting searched and stuff like that. It's all sort of abstract for them. But I would hope that people would take the issue seriously, because you end up with crazy abuses. And what ends up happening for the most part is kids get arrested for having drugs. And I don't think that's good. Expelled and stuff like that for having drugs. I mean, whoop-de-doo. Some teenager smoking pot at school. Oh my God, the world's coming to an end.
Doesn't pose a clear and present danger.
Yeah. I mean, for God's sake, he could turn the whole student body into potheads. Then what would happen? Why?
J-Matt did it.
They'd all become idiots, because people who smoke marijuana are stupid. We need to take that seriously, everybody. Okay, it's a gateway drug. First of all, you should know that it's a gateway drug.
J-Matt, didn't you see those informing commercials that aired during the 80s and 90s where the guy throws the egg into the pan and he says, "This is your brain on drugs." That's what happens, Shay.
I haven't seen them now.
Well,
Maybe
I
that's
can
why.
tell you for sure, if you smoke marijuana more than 3 or 4 times, you become mentally retarded. It's true. Watch
I
out
think
for
it
that.
causes long-term damage. I do think that.
Do you?
Oh yeah, no, I totally do.
When is it going to kick in? I've been smoking weed
It's already.
for 31 years.
I think there's a part of you that is missing that wasn't missing before.
You know,
And
eating,
also,
It's not the
eating
part that
causes
kicks your
long-term
ass.
damage.
Right, it's not that part.
Right. Okay. All right. What did you say, Ken? You had a point you wanted to make?
Did I?
I don't know.
I can't remember.
Somebody said something. Okay. Thanks for watching. Have a good evening.